Hey there, Witsky man. Zach over at Feel Free to Argue. Woke up this morning and checked out the vid that you put up last night, and I got some thoughts about it, about the good old free market. I want to talk about how the free market is something that sounds fair, how it allegedly solves for everything. Talk a little bit later about regulations, and want to ask some questions at the end. So first I want to talk about this whole notion about free markets as something that was kind of won at the naming phase, like a lot of things. Free markets, unfortunately, have this name already, and there's nothing else that I think they're ever going to be called, though I think it's a really bad name for them, because they are free, but they're free for corporations and not necessarily for people. And, you know, I think it's become something that's very hard to attack because it's got the word free in the title. You know, just in the same way that, you know, if you're going to do something that's going to take people's rights away, by all means call it the Patriot Act. And if you're, you know, going to roll back years and years of environmental regulations, you know, call it either the Clear Skies Initiative or the Healthy Forests Initiative or anything but we're screwing our forests and our skies initiative, which is what it really is. Unfortunately, the problem with a lot of these things, you know, especially in terms of free markets, is that it's something that looks fair while it is not really fair. I mean, I'm always reminded of the scene in The Princess Bride where the man in black and Fezzik, the giant, are facing down, and you know, Fezzik says, well, you know, we could just fight hand to hand, and the man in black says, oh, okay, so I put down my sword and you put down your rock and we try to kill ourselves like civilized people. And you know, of course, you know, the man in black wins in that, and that's why it's a fantasy. In the regular scenario, when the enormous, you know, giant fights the little guy, generally the little guy is going to get, you know, crushed. But, you know, there's this very, very palatable illusion that exists, you know, that people talk about. It's like, oh, the market solves for everything. You know, talking about this miracle of the market and how, you know, if you just leave the market alone and you don't regulate any of the corporations, everything will, you know, always turn out fine. Which, I mean, even if you want to accept the way in which this works, let's all be really clear about the way the market works. And this isn't an ideal situation. Let's look at an ideal example of how, you know, a free market would solve for a particular problem. Let's say you're a meatpacking plant, and you're a pretty lousy meatpacking plant. You've been cutting some corners to try to increase the bottom line because your shareholders are getting pretty upset with you because you're not making enough money. So, in order to make enough money, you've cut your standards a whole lot, and now you're putting out a lot of really unsafe meat that, you know, has E. coli and stuff in it. Well, of course, you're responsible for an E. coli outbreak, and eventually, they track it back to you, and you know, I guess it's reported on that you are the company who let out, you know, this batch of contaminated meat, and then people stop buying your product, and you go under. Meanwhile, you know, whoever got targeted with the E. coli, you know, whoever received the tainted meat, you know, is either sick or died. All the employees in the company, which had nothing to do with this policy of lowering the standards so that, you know, they could make more money for the shareholders, you know, they all lose their jobs. Presumably the executives, you know, because they're, you know, have their golden parachutes and they just move on to some other company where they make their big fat paychecks again. And this is like, you know, this is an ideal situation, actually, for, you know, a free market, because I envision a situation where it's much more likely that, you know, especially as the market gets more free, that, you know, businesses have more and more power, because, you know, who's speaking out for the common man in this scenario? Eventually, it's going to be like rollerball, and businesses are going to dominate every single, you know, aspect of society. And I think it would be very possible for them to keep a lid on, you know, whatever, you know, horrific thing they're doing, you know, that they could, deny that it was them, or that they could say that the meat got tainted somewhere else along the line, or maybe, there are just a few outbreaks here and there, and the consumers never get together as a unit and talk to each other and find out that they all got their meat from the same place, and it never gets out. So maybe the market doesn't solve for the problem at all. And just so we're clear, when people talk about free markets, what Grover Norquist and his shock troops want is they want no regulation. None whatsoever. So when they talk about, like, the free market solving for things, they don't care that it solves for it in kind of a messy, fashion that's going to result in people dying and stuff. They're just talking about the maximization of profit for the most people. And that's really all that they care about. But basically what you're evolving towards when you're advocating for free markets is basically economic Darwinism administered by corporations, not by government, and I don't even think to any great extent overseen by any kind of journalistic enterprise that's going to inform us. Because, journalism, just looking at the current scenario, which isn't an entirely free market, journalism is going to end up being co-opted by businesses because they're just much more powerful in the marketplace than people are. So I think this is why you need to have regulations. You need to have regulations just because you need some sort of check on human greed. I think, the current times are a perfect example of, what happens when you remove the regulations on anything. Well, we removed the regulations on our financial markets, and look what happened there. You have the Enron loophole, you have oil speculation, and this is all because these markets, are completely unregulated. So, I think you need to be realistic about human nature. You need to work with assumptions about how the way people operate that are actually true. And I think it's silly to say that, we just need to drop all the regulations on businesses and everybody will act morally. Oh, you mean like they have? And this is what I've always viewed as being the major problem with people who advocate for free markets, because I just don't think they're being at all realistic about human nature and just how freaking greedy we are. I don't think there's anything wrong with us being greedy. I think it's what makes capitalism work. But by the same token, I don't think you should be stupid about it and say that we're not greedy, that we're just these lovely, warm, cuddly human beings who only have the interest of our brother at heart. That's just bullshit. And it's like, 100 different kinds and flavors of bullshit. I just don't have any patience with that, because all the evidence shows is that if there's a profitable way for someone to make money in a way that society views as unethical, that people will go ahead and do that anyway. They're not encouraged by society's notions of what is and isn't ethical if they feel like they can get away with something. Now, at the end, I just kind of want to ask some questions, because I think it's important to think about this kind of stuff. Like, for example, how does the free market stop a monopoly and vigorous protection of the same in order to protect their own market domination? I don't think there's anything that stops the formation of monopolies in a true free market system. By the same token, what prevents companies from lying about effectiveness, about safety, about stuff that they've done to address previous concerns that have come up? And this is a question that I mentioned earlier. What happens if companies come to dominate the media so that, you never can get any kind of effective information about when companies are doing things wrong? And these are just some of the problems that I see with free markets and why I'm generally against them. All aside from the fact that, free market tends to destroy the safety net, which I think is the hallmark of any kind of civilized society that cares about its people. So there's my long-winded answers to Whiskey Man's fairly short video.